What would you do if federal agents killed two of your neighbors in 3 weeks and nobody was charged? That's not a hypothetical. That's what happened in Minneapolis, and the response from the American public has been unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime. 7 million people. That's the number that showed up for a single day of protest against this administration last October. 7 million, across all 50 states, in 2,700 separate events. That was before Minneapolis. That was before two American citizens were shot dead by immigration agents in their own city. Now the movement is building towards something even larger on March 28th, and the demands have shifted from policy complaints to something more fundamental. They want Trump removed from office. I need to walk you through what's actually happening here, because the scope of what's unfolded over the past 2 months is staggering, and the mainstream coverage isn't capturing the full picture. Let's start with the deaths. On January 7th, 2026, Renee Nicole Macklin Good, a 37-year-old mother of three, was shot and killed by an ICE agent named Jonathan Ross in South Minneapolis. According to federal officials, she had weaponized her vehicle, and the agent acted in self-defense. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey responded by calling that narrative garbage and told ICE to get the fuck out of Minneapolis. Video evidence showed Good sitting in her car, motionless, before agents surrounded her vehicle. She briefly reversed, then moved forward and to the right, away from the agent. Ross fired 3 shots, killing her. 17 days later, on January 24th, Alex Jeffrey Pretti, also 37, was shot multiple times by Border Patrol officers. Pretti was an ICU nurse at a local VA hospital. He was a U.S. citizen. According to bystander video, federal agents surrounded Pretti on the ground, punched him, and one agent removed a firearm from his possession. Then they shot him. The Department of Homeland Security said agents acted in self-defense. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called that claim nonsense and lies. Former President Barack Obama released a statement saying the killings should be a wake-up call to every American, regardless of party, that many of our core values as a nation are increasingly under assault. Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton, a Marine Corps veteran, told CNN the only debate to be had about Pretty's death is whether it was a murder or execution. And then the protesters came. Within 48 hours of Renee Good's killing, more than 1,200 vigils were organized nationwide. Protests erupted in New York, Chicago, Portland, Boston, El Paso. In Minneapolis, despite temperatures reaching -29°C, organizers claimed 50,000 people marched through the city demanding ICE withdrawal. Schools closed. Businesses shut down. The city of Minneapolis estimates the federal operation cost local businesses $81 million in January alone, with a total economic impact exceeding $203 million. 60 CEOs from Minnesota-based companies, including 3M, Target, Best Buy, United Health Group, Mayo Clinic, and General Mills, signed an open letter demanding immediate de-escalation of tensions. Bruce Springsteen released a protest song called Streets of Minneapolis. It went #1 in 19 countries. I want your gut reaction here. Is this resistance, or is this something else entirely? Am I overstating what's happening? Let me give you the scale of the federal response that triggered all of this. Operation Metro Surge deployed nearly 3,000 federal immigration agents to Minnesota starting December 1st, 2025. According to the White House, more than 4,000 arrests were made. It was described as the largest immigration enforcement operation in U.S. history. A federal judge, Patrick Schiltz, Minnesota's chief U.S. district judge, found that ICE violated at least 96 court orders in Minnesota since January 1st, 2026. That's not a protest slogan. That's a federal judge documenting nearly 100 court order violations in a single month. When leaders of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division declined to open a constitutional investigation into Pretty's killing, more than a dozen federal prosecutors in Minneapolis and Washington resigned in protest. Resigned. Career prosecutors walking away from their jobs rather than be part of what they apparently saw as a cover-up. Don Lemon, the former CNN journalist, was arrested in St. Paul while covering protests at a church. He pleaded not guilty and told reporters he was arrested for something I've been doing for the last 30 years, and that is covering the news. This is the context for what's happening now. The No Kings Coalition, which organized the October protests, has announced a mass mobilization for March 28th. The flagship event will be in Minneapolis. Leah Greenberg, co-founder of Indivisible, one of the coalition's organizing groups, told Time magazine that opposition to Donald Trump has only grown since October. The coalition launched a nationwide Eyes on ICE training program to teach citizens how to safely monitor federal enforcement actions. The first virtual training drew over 200,000 viewers, 200,000 people signing up to learn how to observe federal agents in their communities. The scale of that engagement is extraordinary. But here's where the dynamics get complicated, and this is what I want your perspective on. Calls for Trump's removal are intensifying. Multiple impeachment resolutions have been introduced in Congress. Representative Al Green has pushed 2 separate impeachment efforts. Representative Sri Thanadar introduced 7 articles of impeachment, arguing Trump committed obstruction of justice and violated constitutional separations of power. More than 80 Democrats have co-sponsored articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem specifically. Organizations like Citizens Impeachment, Free Speech for People, and the 50501 movement are demanding Congress impeach, convict, and remove Trump and senior officials. But Democratic leadership is moving cautiously. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said he hasn't ruled anything in or anything out, but emphasized that impeachment requires a comprehensive investigative process. The party's focus, according to leadership, is on the midterm elections. They believe they can win back the House in November, and they're concerned that pushing impeachment now could backfire politically. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut put it bluntly, Trump has committed more impeachable offenses in his second term than his first, but any effort to impeach should wait until after 2026. Trump, for his part, has warned Republicans that if they lose the midterms, I'll get impeached. He's right. If Democrats take the House, impeachment becomes not just possible, but likely. So the question becomes, is this about removing Trump, or is this about building political leverage for November? And does that distinction even matter to the millions of people in the streets? The administration's response to Minneapolis tells you something about how they're reading the situation. On February 4th, Border Czar Tom Homan announced that 700 immigration officers would be withdrawn from Minnesota immediately. On February 12th, he announced Operation Metro Surge would end entirely. A small footprint would remain, but the surge was over. Governor Walz's interpretation. The Trump administration knew it needed to withdraw federal agents, particularly after the killings of Renee Good and Alex Pretti, but in very Trumpian fashion, they needed to save face. Mayor Fry posted that Minneapolitans showed, standing with our neighbors is deeply American. But protesters aren't satisfied. At demonstrations over the weekend, organizers said they don't trust the drawdown is real. State Senator Erin May Quaid said, despite the messaging of the drawdown, this is not over. And they're right to be skeptical. Approximately 2,000 federal agents remain deployed in Minnesota. The administration framed the withdrawal as a tactical success, not a retreat. ICE enforcement continues. The agents who killed Good and Pretti have not been charged. Here's the bigger picture that I think is getting lost. The October No Kings protests drew 7 million participants. That's 14 times larger than both of Trump's inaugurations combined, according to the coalition's own numbers. Independent estimates generally confirmed crowds in the millions. Police departments in cities like San Diego, Charlotte, and Austin reported no arrests and thanked protesters for remaining peaceful. The reference point everyone uses is the 2017 Women's March, which held the previous record for largest single-day protest in American history. The October protests likely exceeded it. And that was before Minneapolis. The 3.5% rule is getting discussed in organizing circles. It's a theory from political scientist Erica Chenoweth, suggesting that sustained, nonviolent movements involving at least 3.5% of a country's population have never failed to achieve major political change. For the United States, that's roughly 11 to 12 million people. 7 million showed up in October. Organizers are projecting larger numbers for March. But I want to be careful not to overstate what protests alone can accomplish. The federal government has demonstrated it's willing to accept serious reputational damage and massive disruption rather than fundamentally change course. The partial withdrawal from Minneapolis came only after sustained economic disruption, 60 CEO signatures, national media attention, the resignation of federal prosecutors, and intervention from the governor and attorney general. And even then, the agents who killed 2 American citizens face no charges. The Trump administration has also shown it's willing to use force against protesters. Federal agents fired tear gas and pepper balls into crowds in Minneapolis. They blocked state investigators from accessing shooting scenes. DHS expanded ICE arrest powers through internal memos. Trump ordered DHS to stay away from protests in Democratic cities unless asked for help, but simultaneously pledged aggressive protection of federal buildings. He called protesters highly paid lunatics, agitators, and insurrectionists. So what's actually happening? Is this the beginning of the end of the Trump administration? Or is it more protest energy that ultimately dissipates without structural change? Here's what I think is significant. The movement has evolved beyond single-issue protests. The No Kings coalition includes immigration groups, labor unions like the AFL-CIO, civil liberties organizations like the ACLU, and environmental groups. They're not just protesting ICE raids. They're framing this as a defense of constitutional democracy against authoritarian overreach. That framing connects Minneapolis to broader grievances. The Venezuela operation, which critics call an unconstitutional use of military force, the administration's targeting of political opponents through the Justice Department, threats against federal judges, the Greenland crisis, tariffs that have damaged the economy. Multiple impeachment resolutions cite different articles of abuse of power, from threatening lawmakers with execution to intimidating federal judges to conducting unauthorized military strikes. The protests provide political cover for Democratic lawmakers who might otherwise avoid confrontation. When millions are in the streets demanding impeachment, the cautious approach becomes harder to justify. And the midterm elections are 9 months away. Every poll shows most voters think the country is on the wrong track. Trump's tariff policies have damaged his standing on the economy. The protests keep pressure on Republican incumbents in competitive districts. This is the calculation Democrats are making. Can they channel protest energy into electoral turnout without committing to impeachment proceedings that might energize Trump's base? It's a gamble, and the people in the streets may not wait for politicians to make up their minds. The March 28th mobilization will be a test. If millions show up again, especially in Minneapolis, the pressure on Congress becomes harder to ignore. If numbers disappoint, it may signal protest fatigue. Either way, what's already happened is historic. Federal prosecutors resigned rather than participate in what they saw as injustice. A major American city essentially went on strike against federal enforcement. Corporate America took sides against the administration's tactics. The largest protest movement in American history may be getting larger. The No Kings coalition puts it simply on their website. In America, we don't have kings, and we won't back down against chaos, corruption, and cruelty. Whether that translates into Trump's removal or something short of that depends on what happens in the next 9 months. But here's the question I keep coming back to, and I genuinely want to know your answer. If 7 million people in the streets isn't enough to force accountability for federal agents killing American citizens, what would be enough? What would it take? Let me know in the comments, because I don't think anyone actually knows the answer to that question, and it might be the most important question in American politics right now.